In 1988, a single Iranian mine, a device that cost less than $1,500, struck the USS Samuel B. Roberts in the Persian Gulf, blew a 15-foot hole in the hull, and nearly sank a $200 million warship. That one mine triggered the largest American naval surface engagement since the Second World War. Today, Iran possesses thousands of these mines. They are positioned along the coastline of a waterway that carries 21 million barrels of oil every single day, oil that determines the price of your gasoline, your groceries, your heating bill, and nearly every consumer product in your household. And 12 hours after an Iranian commander publicly stated that the world should prepare for $200 oil, the President of the United States said 7 words. The straits are in great shape. One of those statements is dangerously wrong. And this is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of documented geography, published military capability, measurable market behavior, and a historical pattern that has repeated with haunting precision before every major American military engagement in the Middle East for the past 35 years. What you are about to hear is a breakdown that connects a 21-mile-wide waterway to your kitchen table, not in theory, not in abstraction, in specific dollar amounts that will appear on your gas pump, your grocery receipt, your electricity bill, and your monthly rent if the pattern that the evidence reveals continues to unfold. This is not about politics. This is not about choosing a side. This is about understanding the documented relationship between geography, military capability, and the price of everything you buy. And it begins with a body of water that most people have never thought about and yet depends on more than almost anything else in the world. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. At its narrowest point, it is 21 miles wide. Within those 21 miles, there are 2 shipping lanes, each approximately 2 miles across, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. That is the total available space for commercial navigation, for miles of usable water in each direction. That is it. Every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through those lanes. That is approximately 20–21% of the entire world's daily oil consumption, moving through a space narrower than many American lakes. To understand why this matters to you personally, consider the chain. Oil passes through the strait. It is loaded onto tankers. Those tankers carry it to refineries in Asia, Europe, and North America. Those refineries turn it into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and petrochemical feedstocks. The gasoline goes into your car. The diesel goes into the trucks that deliver every product you purchase. The jet fuel goes into the planes that carry overnight shipments and fresh produce. The petrochemical feedstocks become the plastics, fertilizers, and synthetic materials in nearly everything you own. When the strait flows freely, this chain is invisible. You never think about it. When the strait is threatened, that invisible chain becomes the most important supply line in your life. Tell me in the comments before this video, did you know that a single 21-mile-wide waterway controls the price of nearly everything you buy? The nations that depend on oil transiting this waterway include the largest economies on Earth. Saudi Arabia exports the majority of its crude through the strait. Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar all rely on it. Japan imports nearly 80% of its oil through this passage. South Korea, India, and China are massively dependent on it. Even the United States, which has significantly increased domestic production, remains connected to the strait through the global pricing mechanism. Oil is priced globally. When supply through Hormuz is threatened, the price rises everywhere, including at every gas station in America, regardless of where that specific gallon of gasoline was actually refined. This is the geography. This is the baseline. And this is what makes the next part of this breakdown so critical, because the question is not whether the Strait of Hormuz matters, that is settled. The question is whether Iran can actually threaten it in the way its commanders claim, and what the documented evidence reveals is that Iran has spent for decades building a military architecture specifically designed to do exactly that, and it is far more sophisticated than most Western media coverage acknowledges. What Tehran actually possesses in the waters of the strait is not a single weapon system. It is a layered denial architecture, 5 independent methods of disrupting oil flow, each of which can function even if the other 4 are neutralized. The first layer is mines. Iran maintains one of the largest inventories of naval mines in the world. Estimates from publicly available defense assessments suggest the inventory includes several thousand mines of various types, from simple contact mines that date back decades in design philosophy to more sophisticated influence mines that can be programmed to detonate based on a vessel's magnetic signature, acoustic profile, or pressure wave. The critical point about mines is not their technological sophistication. It is their cost-to-impact ratio. A single mine can cost as little as a few $1,000s. The vessel it damages or sinks can be worth hundreds of millions. The mine-sweeping operation required to clear a mining field in the strait could take weeks or months, and during that entire period, commercial shipping grinds to a halt. Not because the strait is physically blocked, but because no commercial captain will transit a waterway that might contain mines. The second layer is fast attack craft. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' navy operates a fleet of hundreds of small, fast, heavily armed boats. These are not conventional naval vessels. They are designed for a specific tactical doctrine known as swarm attack. The concept is straightforward. Instead of engaging a large warship with another large warship, a fight, Iran would lose you engage it with dozens of small, fast boats simultaneously, approaching from multiple directions at high speed, each carrying rockets, missiles, or explosive charges. The defending warship's fire control systems are forced to track and engage dozens of targets simultaneously. Even the most advanced naval defense systems have engagement rate limitations. If enough small craft attack at once, some will get through, and it only takes one or two successful hits on a commercial oil tanker to create an environmental and economic catastrophe that shuts down the strait through sheer risk. The third layer is anti-ship cruise missiles. Iran has developed and deployed multiple variants of coastal-launched anti-ship missiles, including systems derived from Chinese designs and domestically produced variants. These missiles can be launched from mobile coastal batteries vehicles that drive to a launch position, fire, and relocate within minutes. The coastline of Iran along the Strait of Hormuz is rugged, mountainous terrain with thousands of potential launch positions. Pre-targeting every possible position is effectively impossible. These missiles have ranges that cover the entire width of the strait and beyond. A commercial tanker, which has no defensive countermeasures, no armor, and no evasive capability worth mentioning, is essentially a stationary target. The fourth layer is coastal defense systems. Iran has invested heavily in integrated air defense and radar networks along its southern coastline. These systems are designed to detect, track, and engage aircraft and cruise missiles that might be sent to suppress the first three layers. The rugged geography of the Iranian coastline provides natural concealment for these systems. Tunnels, caves, and hardened positions carved into the mountains along the strait have been documented in publicly available satellite imagery for years. The purpose of this layer is to make the suppression of Iran's offensive capabilities as costly and time-consuming as possible, buying time for the mines, swarm boats, and missiles to inflict damage on commercial shipping. The fifth layer is submarines. Iran operates a small but strategically significant submarine force, including Russian-built Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines. In the shallow, acoustically complex waters of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, diesel-electric submarines are exceptionally difficult to detect. They can sit silently on the seabed, waiting for a high-value target to pass overhead. The psychological impact of a submarine threat in the strait is arguably as significant as the physical threat because it creates uncertainty. Every commercial vessel transiting the strait would do so knowing that an undetected submarine could be beneath it. Uncertainty is the enemy of commerce. But here is what most people miss about how these 5 layers actually function together. Iran does not need to use all of them. Iran does not need to sink a single ship. Iran does not even need to fire a single missile. To understand why, you need to understand the insurance mechanism, and this is the part of the equation that almost no media coverage explains properly. Every commercial vessel that transits international waters carries insurance. That insurance is underwritten by major global insurance markets, the most significant of which is Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's maintains a joint war committee that designates certain waterways and regions as high-risk zones. When a waterway is designated as a high-risk zone, the insurance premiums for any vessel transiting that waterway increase dramatically, sometimes by factors of 10 or more. These increased premiums are not optional. No commercial shipping company operates without insurance. The costs are passed directly to the cargo owners, who pass them to the refineries, who pass them to the distributors, who pass them to you at the gas pump and the grocery store. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the market is already telling us something the president is not. Here is how the insurance weapon works in practice. If Iran deploys even a small number of mines in or near the strait, even if those mines damage no vessel, and publicizes that deployment, Lloyd's Joint War Committee would almost certainly reclassify the strait as an active war risk zone the moment that reclassification occurs. Insurance premiums for strait transit would spike to levels that make commercial shipping economically unviable. Shipping companies would voluntarily reroute or halt operations. The strait would effectively close, not because of a physical blockade, not because of a military confrontation, but because of an insurance reclassification, triggered by a credible threat. This is the insurance weapon, and it means that Iran can shut down 21 million barrels per day of oil flow without firing a single shot, without sinking a single ship, without engaging a single American warship. One credible mine deployment, one insurance reclassification, and the global oil market loses 20% of its supply overnight. If this analysis is giving you clarity that headlines cannot, a quick like helps this reach more people who deserve to understand what is actually at stake. Now, back to the breakdown. The insurance mechanism is not theoretical. It has been activated before. During the tanker wars of the 1980s, when Iran and Iraq both attacked commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf, insurance premiums spiked so dramatically that many commercial operators refused to transit without military escort. The United States eventually launched Operation Earnest Will, a massive naval convoy operation specifically because the insurance market had made unescorted commercial transit economically impossible. The military did not intervene because of a blockade. The military intervened because the insurance market had effectively created one. And there is a piece of documentary evidence from within the American military establishment itself that reveals just how seriously the Pentagon takes Iran's layered denial capability. In 2002, the United States military conducted one of the most expensive and elaborate war game exercises in its history. It was called Millennium Challenge. The exercise was designed to test American military readiness against a hypothetical adversary in the Persian Gulf region. That adversary was widely understood by defense analysts to represent Iran. The commander playing the role of the adversary was Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper, a retired Marine Corps officer. Van Riper did not follow the script. Instead of engaging the American fleet in a conventional naval battle which he would have lost, he used exactly the tactics that Iran has been developing. For decades, he launched a massive swarm attack using small boats and simultaneously fired a barrage of cruise missiles from shore positions. The result was catastrophic for the American side. In the simulation, 16 American warships were sunk, including an aircraft carrier and several cruisers, the equivalent of a significant portion of the American naval fleet in the region was destroyed in a matter of hours. The exercise was so embarrassing that it was reportedly halted and restarted with new rules that prevented the adversary from using the tactics that had proven so effective. Van Riper publicly protested, calling the restart a rigged outcome designed to validate a predetermined conclusion. The details of Millennium Challenge became publicly known through media reporting and Van Riper's own public statements about the exercise. The significance of Millennium Challenge is not that it proves Iran would win a naval war against the United States. It would not. The United States possesses overwhelming military superiority in every conventional category. The significance is that it demonstrated in the Pentagon's own exercise that swarm tactics and layered denial strategies can inflict catastrophic damage before that superiority can be brought to bear. And in the context of the Strait of Hormuz, catastrophic damage does not mean winning a war. It means sinking enough commercial vessels or creating enough risk to trigger the insurance mechanism. And as Millennium Challenge showed, that threshold can be reached faster than most people assume. And this is the part that changes everything about how you should think about $200 oil, because the evidence shows that the threat to the Strait of Hormuz is not hypothetical. It is documented, it is exercised, it is measured by the global insurance market in real time, and right now at this moment the oil futures market, the marine insurance industry, and the international shipping sector are all behaving as though the risk is real and increasing. Oil futures have moved into a structure that analysts describe as backwardation, where near-term contracts are priced higher than longer-term contracts. This structure emerges when the market believes that short-term supply disruption is more likely than long-term disruption. It is a market signal that current supply is at risk. Marine insurance premiums for vessels transiting the Persian Gulf have increased measurably during recent escalation periods, and shipping companies have begun diversifying routes and adjusting transit schedules, behaviors that are consistent with elevated risk assessment, not with a strait that is in great shape. So the oil market says one thing, the insurance market says one thing, the shipping industry says one thing, and the President of the United States says the opposite. That contradiction between documented market behavior and official reassurance is not new. It is a pattern. And it is a pattern that has repeated before every single major American military engagement in the Middle East for over 3 decades. In August 1990, 5 days before Saddam Hussein's forces invaded Kuwait, the President of the United States publicly stated that the situation was being managed diplomatically. The diplomatic track, the public was told, was working. There was no need for alarm. Within days, Iraqi tanks rolled across the Kuwaiti border. Oil prices spiked by more than 70% within months. The diplomatic reassurance was either wrong or deliberately misleading. The pattern emerged. In February 2003, weeks before the invasion of Iraq, the administration publicly assured the American people that military action was a last resort, that every diplomatic avenue was being exhausted, that the decision for war had not yet been made. Publicly available reporting later revealed that military planning for the invasion had been underway for months before those reassurances were issued. The invasion proceeded, oil prices rose sharply. The reassurance once again was either wrong or strategically timed. In March 2011, days before the NATO intervention in Libya, the White House stated publicly that there were no plans for American military involvement, that the situation was being handled through international pressure and diplomatic channels. Within days, American cruise missiles were striking Libyan targets. The reassurance was once again contradicted by events that followed almost immediately. What the records show is not necessarily deliberate deception in the way that the word is commonly understood. What the pattern reveals is something more nuanced and, in many ways, more concerning, Presidential reassurance before military engagement serves a strategic communication function. It prevents premature market panic. It maintains operational surprise. It preserves diplomatic flexibility until the final moment. The president may genuinely believe the reassurance at the time it is delivered, or the reassurance may be a calculated communication strategy. In either case, the documented historical outcome is the same. The reassurance is followed by escalation, every single time. The straits are in great shape. 7 words, and the historical pattern they fit into is a pattern with a 100% escalation rate over the past 35 years. Now, none of this analysis proves that military conflict over the Strait of Hormuz is imminent. Patterns are not prophecies, but patterns are the closest thing to prophecy that evidence-based analysis offers. And when the market data, the insurance data, the shipping data, and the historical precedent all point in the same direction, and that direction contradicts the official reassurance, the documented record suggests that the market is more reliable than the reassurance. Which brings us to what $200 oil actually means for your daily life. Not in abstract economic terms, in the specific dollar amounts that will appear on your receipts if the scenario that the market is pricing in actually materializes. The historical relationship between crude oil prices and retail gasoline prices is well documented. For every $1 increase in the price of a barrel of crude oil, gasoline prices at the pump typically increase by approximately 2 to 3 cents per gallon, depending on refining capacity, regional taxes, and distribution costs. Current crude oil prices fluctuate in ranges that produce gasoline prices most Americans are familiar with. If crude oil were to reach $200 per barrel, a price point that has never been reached but which is within the range of disruption scenarios modeled by energy analysts, the corresponding gasoline price would likely fall between $8 and $10 per gallon. For a household that consumes 60 gallons of gasoline per month, roughly the American average, that represents a monthly fuel cost increase of approximately $250 to $350. But gasoline is only the beginning. Diesel fuel, which is refined from the same crude oil, powers the trucks that deliver virtually every product to every store in the country. When diesel prices spike, transportation costs spike. When transportation costs spike, the price of every transported good increases. Grocery prices are particularly sensitive to diesel costs because food products are heavy, perishable, and transported frequently. Historical analysis of previous oil price spikes suggests that a sustained crude oil increase to the $200 range would translate into grocery price increases of approximately 10 to 15% for a household that spends $600 per month on groceries, close to the national average that represents an additional $60 to $90 per month. Heating costs for households that use soil or natural gas heating would increase substantially. Electricity costs in regions that rely on natural gas or oil-fired power generation would rise. Rent would increase in subsequent months as landlords pass through higher energy and maintenance costs. The total household budget impact of sustained $200 oil combining fuel, groceries, heating, electricity, and indirect cost increases is estimated by energy economists at approximately $300 to $500 additional dollars per month for an average American household. That is not a rounding error. That is not an inconvenience. For millions of households already living paycheck to paycheck, that is the difference between solvency and crisis. And this is the lens through which those 7 words, "the straits are in great shape," must be evaluated, not as a political statement, not as a diplomatic position, but as a claim that, if wrong, will cost the average American household thousands of dollars per year. The evidence has now established the geography, the military capability, the insurance mechanism, the market signals, the historical pattern, and the household cost. What remains is the forward-looking question: what actually happens next? The documented patterns and current indicators suggest 3 plausible scenarios, each grounded in historical precedent. Scenario A is the most likely outcome based on the weight of historical evidence. In this scenario, Iran continues to demonstrate its capability through calculated provocations, naval exercises in the Strait, publicized missile tests, close encounters with commercial vessels without triggering a full closure or kinetic engagement. Oil prices spike into the $120 to $140 range as risk premiums expand. Markets absorb the shock over 60 to 90 days as diplomatic back channels between regional and global powers work to de-escalate. Insurance premiums rise but do not reach the threshold that halts commercial shipping entirely. Gasoline prices increase noticeably but remain below the catastrophic range. Grocery prices tick upward. The situation stabilizes at an elevated baseline. This scenario has the closest historical parallel to the periodic escalation cycles in the Strait that occurred during the 2010 to 2020 period. When tensions flared, tankers were seized or damaged, and the situation eventually de-escalated without full disruption. Scenario B is the dangerous escalation path. In this scenario, a miscalculation by either side triggers a kinetic engagement. A commercial tanker is struck by a mine or missile. Crew members are killed or injured. The images dominate global media. Lloyd's immediately reclassifies the strait. Insurance premiums make commercial transit unviable. Shipping halts voluntarily. Oil supply drops by millions of barrels per day within 48 hours. Prices spike to the $180 to $220 range. Stock markets crash. A global recession begins within 90 days. The historical parallel for this scenario is the 1973 oil embargo, when a politically motivated supply disruption triggered a quadrupling of oil prices and a global recession that reshaped the economic order for a decade. The difference is that in 1973, the disruption was voluntary and could be reversed by political decision. A kinetic engagement in the strait would create a disruption that is physical, military, and far harder to reverse quickly. Scenario C is the wild card that nobody expects. In this scenario, Iran deploys the insurance weapon deliberately and precisely. A small, publicized mine deployment in or near the strait carefully designed to create maximum perception of risk with minimum actual damage. No vessels struck, no casualties. But the credible threat is established. Lloyd's reclassifies, insurance premiums spike, commercial shipping halts voluntarily. The strait closes without a single shot being fired. Iran achieves its strategic objective, demonstrating that it can shut down the global oil supply at will without providing a clear military justification for a retaliatory strike. This scenario has no direct historical parallel, which is precisely what makes it a wild card. It exploits the insurance mechanism in a way that has never been tested at this scale, and it places Western decision-makers in a dilemma with no clean options. Strike Iran for deploying mines that damaged nothing, or accept a de facto strait closure that Iran can reverse at any time by simply announcing the mines have been removed. Drop your answer below. Which of these three scenarios do you believe is most likely? The calibrated escalation, the dangerous miscalculation, or the insurance weapon that shuts down shipping without a single shot? And tell me why. But before we close this breakdown, there is one more layer that almost nobody is talking about, and it has nothing to do with Iran's military or the president's words. It has to do with something far more fragile, the global oil market's total spare capacity, and what the data shows is that the entire system is already running on fumes. The global oil market currently operates with approximately 2 to 3 million barrels per day of spare production capacity. That figure comes from the International Energy Agency's publicly available assessments, and it represents the total additional output that OPEC Plus member nations could theoretically bring online within 290 days if called upon. 2 to 3 million barrels per day sounds like a meaningful buffer. It is not. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 21 million barrels per day. If even a quarter of that flow is disrupted, approximately 5 million barrels per day, the spare capacity of the entire global production system is already overwhelmed. If half of the flow is disrupted, the gap between supply and demand becomes approximately 8 to 10 million barrels per day. No combination of spare capacity, emergency production increases, and strategic reserve releases can fill a gap of that magnitude. The math does not work, not in 30 days, not in 90 days. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve of the United States, the emergency stockpile designed to cushion exactly this type of disruption, has been drawn down significantly from its historical peak. At its maximum, the SPAR held approximately 700 million barrels. Current levels are substantially below that peak following drawdowns that were authorized in previous years to manage domestic gasoline prices. Even at full capacity, the SPAR was designed for short-term disruptions lasting weeks, not sustained supply losses lasting months. If the Strait of Hormuz were disrupted for an extended period, the SPAR would be depleted in a time frame measured in weeks to a few months, depending on the rate of release. The historical precedent is instructive. During the 1973 oil embargo, the disruption represented approximately 5% of global oil supply. Prices quadrupled. During the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the disruption represented approximately 4% of global supply. Prices more than doubled. A significant Strait of Hormuz disruption would represent 10 to 20% of global supply, a magnitude that has no historical parallel in the modern oil era. The price response to a disruption of that scale is not linear. It is exponential. Markets do not simply calculate the supply loss and adjust proportionally. Markets panic. Hoarding begins. Spot prices decouple from fundamentals. The price reaches levels that are determined not by economics but by fear. And this is the context in which those 7 words must be placed. The straits are in great shape, spoken into a global energy system with minimal spare capacity, a drawn-down strategic reserve, documented military threats, activated market risk signals, and a historical pattern of presidential reassurance that has preceded every major escalation for 35 years. So what can you actually do? Because understanding a threat without knowing how to respond to it is incomplete analysis, and this channel exists to provide complete analysis. There are four specific actions that energy economists and financial preparedness analysts have identified as reasonable responses to elevated oil disruption risk actions that make sense regardless of which scenario unfolds. The first is fuel cost management. If you drive a gasoline-powered vehicle, the simplest form of cost management is efficiency. Proper tire inflation, reduced idling, consolidated trips, and steady speed driving can improve fuel efficiency by 10 to 15%, the equivalent of saving 60 to 90 cents per gallon at today's prices, and proportionally more if prices spike. For households considering a vehicle change, the current period of relative price stability is the window of opportunity. Once prices spike, demand for fuel-efficient vehicles skyrockets and prices for those vehicles spike with it. The second is grocery budget adjustment, building a modest pantry buffer, not panic buying, but gradually increasing your household's supply of shelf-stable foods from a 2-week buffer to a 4 to 6-week buffer provides a cushion against the grocery price spikes that follow oil disruptions. The cost of building this buffer at current prices is a fraction of what the same products would cost during a supply disruption. This is not survivalism. This is the same logic that drives every inventory management system in the corporate world: buy at low prices, consume during high prices. The third is energy efficiency investment. If your household heating or cooling costs are already a significant budget item, any investment in efficiency insulation, weatherization, thermostat management, or fuel source diversification pays for itself faster when energy prices rise. The return on investment for these improvements increases proportionally with energy costs. The fourth is financial positioning awareness. This does not constitute financial advice. This analysis does not provide investment recommendations. But understanding that oil price spikes historically correlate with specific market sectors, energy stocks tend to rise, transportation and consumer discretionary stocks tend to fall, and certain commodity-linked instruments move predictably, is publicly available economic knowledge that any viewer can research further through qualified financial sources. These four actions are not guarantees against economic disruption. They are buffers, and buffers are what separate households that survive oil shocks from households that are devastated by them. Now let us pull together everything this breakdown has established. A 21-mile-wide waterway carries 20% of the world's oil supply. The nation that controls the northern coastline of that waterway has spent for decades building a 5-layer military architecture specifically designed to disrupt flow through it. That nation does not need to physically block the waterway. It only needs to create enough credible risk to trigger an insurance reclassification that shuts down commercial shipping voluntarily. The American military's own war games have demonstrated that the swarm tactics central to this strategy can inflict catastrophic damage before conventional superiority can respond. The oil market, the insurance market, and the shipping industry are all currently pricing in elevated risk, and the President's public reassurance fits a documented historical pattern that has preceded every major American military engagement in the Middle East since 1990. Here is what you now understand that you did not understand before watching this breakdown. First, Iran's ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz is not a bluff. It is a documented, layered military capability that has been validated by the Pentagon's own exercises and observed by every major defense analysis institution in the world. The threat is real and it is specific. Second, the insurance mechanism means that the threshold for disruption is far lower than most people assume. Iran does not need to win a naval war. It does not need to sink a fleet. It needs to create enough risk to change an insurance classification. That threshold can be crossed with a single credible mine deployment. Third, the gap between official reassurance and documented market behavior is not a new phenomenon. It is a recurring pattern with a consistent historical outcome. When the market and the president disagree about the Middle East, the market has been right every single time in the modern era. Understanding geopolitics is not about predicting the future. It is about understanding the forces that are already in motion and recognizing the gap between what you are told and what the evidence shows. That gap is where preparation lives, and preparation is the only insurance policy that works when the world changes faster than the headlines can keep up. If this breakdown changed the way you think about what connects a 21-mile waterway to your kitchen table, subscribe to this channel. Every video on Atlas Geopolitical is built to give you the understanding that the news cycle cannot provide. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments after everything you have seen in this breakdown. Do you trust the 7 words more, or do you trust the market data more? Write it out. I read every single response. The next breakdown on this channel covers what 30 consecutive days of sustained strait disruption would actually look like day by day, sector by sector, country by country. It connects directly to everything you just learned. That video is on screen right now. This has been an Atlas Geopolitical Analysis. All content is educational. Commentary based on historical patterns and publicly available information.